Hi there, it's Peter Temple of New Earth Rising on Telegram, and this is a calendar update for September the 11th, 2025, which is Jesus' birthday on the Gregorian calendar. So what I want to do is give you an update. I thought I should do it today because I got a blog post going out which is called 9/11, which is what we are on, even though this can be construed as 7/11 because we know September, the word Sept, S-E-P-T, means seven. And so we get a 7/11 reading here, depending on what calendar you're on. And we know you're going to the lunar calendar, so this would actually be the 7th month we're in. If we go to the lunar calendar, and right now in the Gregorian calendar, it's actually the 9th month. So it's, we're changing calendars, and that makes this entire exercise just that more difficult. And there's also the Ethiopian calendar, and the new year on the Ethiopian calendar is there's a little bit of uncertainty, but it looks like it's today. It's either today or it's tomorrow, and it's one of those two, and depending on who you listen to. So that is happening at the same time. But what I've got for you here, if you've been following along with me, is the month of September. It's not quite full. It takes us to the 27th, and there's another 3 days after that, 28, 29, 30, which would fulfill September. And is actually, October 1 is actually the fiscal new year, so the financial new year, pretty well for the world. It is for North America. So that's an important date, and the quantum financial system will be in place and operating that day. So that's kind of our end date for all of this. You can keep that in mind. So I want to go right back to August the 31st, which is up here. That was actually Diana's death day in 1997, and we're expecting to hear more about where she is. Apparently there were some ups and downs in her life. She's still here, but I saw a note the other day that is a little complex. I need to get back and figure it out because we were expecting something to happen. It hasn't quite happened, but I know it's going to. So there's going to be a lot of surprises still to come. Labor Day was here on September the 1st, of course. Then we started the scare event, and that's kind of been predicted for a long time. But we finally got to it, certainly this week. We're sort of in the throes of it right now in this area around the 11th, and I'm expecting some big sparks tonight, and probably leading into the 12th, which is going to sort of feature NATO. I didn't put that on there because I'm not quite sure, but somewhere in these 3-4 days, we're going to get this nuclear standoff and a declaration of war, and that may come from NATO because there is a rule or an article number 5 that has to be announced, and that is apparently going to happen on the 12th. But let's get back here to the 2nd of September, the Day of Atonement. That kind of rolled by us, and we didn't pay an awful lot of attention to it, but it's a solemn day of fasting, prayer, and repentance, symbolizing cleansing and reconciliation with God. So that's a little bit of a warning of what's going to come. Robert Mueller was supposed to be in front of Congress that day, but canceled because of his health. So that was an interesting kind of debacle, and apparently there's a subpoena that we heard was out. I don't know what's going to happen with that. The Bay of Pigs I have here on the 3rd. Now, that has to do with Venezuela. Now, if you go back to the Bay of Pigs, which happened in 1961, in April, actually, for about 4 days, roughly, I was alive then, and I was alive a little bit later on for this nuclear standoff, which is a year and a half later in 1962. The Bay of Pigs was an invasion of Cuba in 1961 under JFK. And it wasn't done by him, but it was done by, apparently planned by Allen Dulles of the CIA. And he determined after that point that he was going to get rid of the CIA. And he had a certain way of putting that. And so that's an interesting thing, because Allen Dulles, who set up the Bay of Pigs, JFK was furious with him. Absolutely furious, because it was done behind his back and created a big problem. In fact, it created a nuclear standoff, and he determined to get rid of the CIA. Allen Dulles ended up being the head of the Warren Commission after the assassination of Kennedy. So it is a really thick web that we have been weaving around the JFK assassination. So this has a lot to do with that, because JFK is working in the background for the transfer that we're going to have, the revolution, really, and there's lots more to that. So I won't go into it here. This is more about the calendar. So Bay of Pigs started here. The nuclear standoff was 13 days in October of 1962, and JFK was still in power. And I can remember it was a standoff, and we were quite worried about a nuclear explosion. It was between the USA and Russia, and it was a standoff because Russia really wanted to, they were unsure about what was happening with Cuba, and they didn't want the U.S. to invade and take it over, so they determined they were going to send some ships with a nuclear arsenal, missiles over to Cuba, and JFK said, no, that's not happening. And there was a standoff in the Caribbean that went on for that sort of 13 days and built up until it finally dissolved into nothing and they made a truce. So that's a big deal, and we are redoing that, and we're really kind of, as today, at the height of it. So the next day, the Department of War was struck, and that came out of the Department of Defense. They changed the name, and that was significant in terms of telling us that the war was going to happen and it was coming soon. We had sort of partial martial law here on the 6th, and that led into, because we now have a number of cities and states, California that have had the National Guard in them, New York, of course, Chicago. Now we've got Baltimore. I'm hearing that we're going to look at Oregon and a number of other states. And Trump has said that when he gives the word, he can have the National Guard in virtually anywhere in North America within about an hour. So they're out there and they're stationed, and we're going to see that pretty quickly. Full moon was here. This was a big one. It was a blood moon. It was also a harvest moon, which talks about the RV and the money coming out and the restitution and all of that. So that's an indicator of that. We had a total lunar eclipse. Some people saw it, some people did not. We were supposed to have Ohio Gate that day, and we haven't heard any more, so maybe that sort of happened in the background. But that's another one with the Finger Lakes and everything that goes on there with, boys and girls and pedophilia, and so that still has to come to the surface. I thought this was going to be the start of alerts, but it was really one big alert that they tested in the UK, United Kingdom. So that went ahead as scheduled, and so everything is set up. That's what it tells us. And then I thought we might get Epstein in the market here. It looks like the market is imminent, probably towards the end of the week, but it began here, and we had this back and forth as to where is the Epstein file. We know that it's been used by the White Hats for blackmail. So in terms of finding these people that were also on the island, and so they have been using that as a tool to be able to get other people to open up about all the bad guys and that sort of thing. But they have the list, they have all the information, and it's going to hit sometime very soon. Loretta Lynch, famous for the meeting with Bill Clinton on the tarmac, she was supposed to go before Congress on the 9th. We didn't hear anything about that. At least I haven't heard anything, so we'll see whether that comes up a little bit later. But they've given us another list of other people down here that are going to happen as of October 2nd. Merrick Garland, October 7th, James Comey, October 9th, Hillary Clinton, and October 14th, Bill Clinton in front of Congress. But that will be after the changeover in the fiscal new year, if you want to think of that, so October the 1st. So it kind of says to me that we have to have, again, supports the idea we have to have everything done by the end of the month. Yesterday was the 10th of September, and of course we had the Charlie Kirk shot heard around the world, which we've been waiting for. That's a marker. And that was a fake assassination, and we've gone through all of the video on that, and I presented that this week to people, as well as Irina Zarutsky. If you remember her from the subway when she was knife murdered, and sort of bled out, that was also fake. So we're getting a lot of these murders, but this was a very important one And this is really the shot around the world and the turning point. Now, Charlie Kirk was involved with the school called The Turning Point. So you always have to look at these indicators and what they mean. So that's a major turning point on the 10th. All right, so we have today where we are. I'm expecting something big. This is something big. Sum of all fears, of course, has been a major theme for this revolution, and we know the music from the end of it, which was, I can't think of the name of it right now, Nussen Dorma at the end of it, and we've heard that over and over again with part of the rallies, or many of the rallies at the end, and that is an indicator that we're going to get something like Sum of All Fears, which was at a stadium. In that case, a football stadium. Trump is tonight at a baseball stadium watching a Yankees game, and you can expect probably something big to happen. We know that the Statue of Liberty has to be taken out in the war. We have virtually everybody making threats against each other. We know that Taiwan is going to be taken over by China somewhere in here. We had Qatar that got bombed by Israel looking for a building that Hamas was working out of. So that then set Qatar and the UAE against Israel. We have other countries that are ganging up against Israel. We now have NATO poised to go to Article 5 in here, which is a point where NATO will state that they will be defending anybody that is part of NATO, which means Europe and a number of other countries in case anybody gets attacked. We now have got Israel has attacked Poland with drones. Netanyahu is out there trying to get rid of Gaza, and that is still going on. Trump has said that he has to have the hostages back, and I won't go in. There's lots more happening, but the issue is that we have all of these countries getting ready to go to war. And that goes back to, the Department of War here that told us this was coming. We knew it's been coming for a long time. We're in the middle of it this weekend, coming into this weekend. And of course, now is Thursday. It's Jesus' birthday, 7/11. And so we'll see what happens tonight, whether Sum of All Fears plays out or will it over the next couple of days. We're hearing that NATO is going to name that article, put it into effect, in Article 5, which I mentioned, on the 12th. And that would be a repeat of 9/11, the original 9/11 in 2001, because they did the same thing 24 hours after the buildings got taken down. So that is a repeat, and it kind of tells us that's what's going to happen. We're expecting King Charles to be taken down. Now, who is the last player in a chess game? It's the king, and it always it's taken down right at the end, checkmate. And so we're expecting this to happen before EBS. I think it will be this weekend. Could be a little bit later, because I think now that EBS is going to happen on the 17th. But we'll get into that, because that could be a false flag, but we've got some things happening there. Being a Friday on the 12th and a very important day, we could get the Trump tweet here, if we're going to get another one. And we could get the mention of Gesara either here or sometime on the weekend leading into EBS, or it could even be the night before if it's on the 17th. So it's getting a little muddy here in terms of what's going to happen when, but we are down to the short strokes in terms of days. Okay, the RV, I've always said this, we have to have martial law. So we've got to have the war. We've got to have then everything going to black, which allows them to turn over the electricity. It also allows martial law to happen, and certainly, and if the president or something else happens in that regard, that would also bring in martial law. And if we get the election turned over, which apparently has been turned over, it is sitting with SCOTUS right now. So that's another thing that could bring down the market. I'm thinking that the 12th is probably when it's going to come down. And the other thing, of course, is the Epstein list. And so all of these things are on tap, and we'll just have to see how this plays out. You have to have all of this, and you have to have martial law in place. I am very adamant on, in order for people, the humanitarians, in this case, the starseeds and everybody who's awake, to go and do their currency revaluations, and that starts up the humanitarian projects ahead of EBS. And I think that's going to be this weekend. But we need to get that going to the blackout and martial law in place, because it needs to be safe for people to go to a redemption center. We're talking about huge amounts of cash changing hands. I mean, this is a golden jubilee, which is huge. I mean, it's happened on Earth before, but not to this degree. This is a huge revolution. So that's somewhere in here we're going to see that. If you go over to this graphic on the 14th, and this is it here, much larger, I've talked about this before, the mountains, the 3 mountains, and the 14 days. So 1, 2, 3, you can't really see those numbers, but they're there. This is 1, 2, 3, and then you've got 4 to 13, and 14 is in the middle of a heart. So you take that and you put it on top of September. And where are we here? Let me go back up here. September, and here it is, the 14th on the Gregorian calendar. Now notice they only put 14 days on this, and that suggests to me that we're going to get maybe the 3 days of darkness. Then we're going to get the 10 days in here starting on the 17th. I thought it might be earlier, but things are just playing out that it seems that that's what's going to happen. So that would take EBS over to the 26th. And there's a number of other things that are happening in here too, but there's a possible calendar change that we're also getting, but I don't think we're going to get that till the 4th of October. And the calendar change would take us to, I'm giving you a lot of information in this, would take us to probably it would start on the 4th, and it might take us to 13 days earlier, the 4th, because they took out 10 days. Well, they didn't really take it out. They just started, this was the Julian calendar, and then they started the Gregorian calendar 10 days later on the Friday, on the 15th. So they kind of took it out of the Gregorian, but we have to get the Gregorian back to where the Julian calendar is. We have to get them matched back up. So that would mean, because of the last 400 years and the sliding of the Julian calendar, it added 3 more days in. So there's a difference between the two of them of 13 days now. So that all has to be rectified, and that would probably happen, I think, on October the 4th, because that's when it happened in 1582, that we changed from the Gregorian calendar, from the Julian calendar, which was put in place by Julius Caesar, and is virtually the same as the Gregorian calendar, but it has a difference of 13 days. It's interesting to note that here is 9/11, today's date, and if you go 13 days ahead, you also get 9/11 on the Julian calendar. So if they collapse that calendar, in fact, this also could be Jesus' birthday because it was on the Julian calendar. But if you collapse the 13 days, the Julian calendar would actually take this day back to the 11th. So this is sort of supporting the idea that Jesus' birthday is in fact today, 7/11, on the either Gregorian, which we're on, or on the Julian if it gets moved. So I'm not sure. There's a graphic that shows a great big 24 that's out today. I'm not sure if this is actually Julius Caesar's birthday, but if you collapse them, it's sort of the same day, but we're not seeing that yet. That hasn't happened, and it seems like they're going to leave it until October the 4th. So that makes things very complex. But anyway, here we are on the 14th, and I thought we might start the emergency broadcast system that day, but we also need to have everything to happen here, and we need to get people into their homes, and they're talking about 3 days of darkness plus 10 days of the emergency broadcast system, which would then take us to the 26th if we're going to start on the 17th. So I think that might be the plan, but we'll have to see what happens. It's interesting when you look at the new moon here that was on not September 1, because this is September 1 here, but it was on the 21st, or it will be on the 21st rather. And then we have equinox, and the 21st, by the way, the new moon in the new lunar calendar, the calendar that we're moving to, which is going to be, the start of it is going to be based on the Julian calendar, but it has 13 months of 28 days each. We're not quite sure where it starts, but we know it does start in April. and it's going to be a year. And that's why you're going to find out that September actually ends up being the 7th month, and that's a big change there. But we're not sure exactly when it's going to click in. I think October the 4th. It may revert back to this date to be the beginning of a new month, and maybe even the beginning of the year. I'm just not sure how they're going to play this and when the months are going to fall into gear. But keep in mind that there's a new moon here on the 21st, and we are told, and we pretty well know this, that each of the months are going to begin on a Monday, but they're also going to begin on a new moon. That's all the months in the lunar calendar. So it's going to be a natural calendar because, of course, it's a 28-day cycle is the moon. So each of the 28 days of the moon will be a month. And then it's also the female cycle as well. So women will be really pleased about that. So they'll actually be the same day. The period will be on the same day each month, which is kind of cool. So that's the new moon. Equinox is when the sun moves over the equator, going from the northern part of the Earth down to the southern part of the Earth. So that takes that is the ending of the, we could kind of call it summer in the northern hemisphere, and then beginning of winter in the southern hemisphere here as it moves over. So it's a big marker. I've got the start of the lunar month here, which is what it should be on the 22nd, and this would also represent 1111, which is a new start. So that's interesting as well. We have the Feast of Trumpets here, which starts on the sunset of the 22nd and announces the arrival of the king. And it goes to the 24th, which is the 24th here, which also could be Jesus' birthday on the Julian calendar. But I told you that if they collapse the calendar, that would end up being here. So I'm not sure how they're going to play this. Trump is apparently scheduled to address the UN here. And I don't want to forget this little square that I put in here, which is now all green. The reason I think this is going to start on the 17th, there have been a couple of comms. Trump is to visit Charles in the UK, and I consider that a comm because Charles might be taken out over here, so he wouldn't exist. And so that kind of tells us, and there's a number of things that are just pushed to the 17th in terms of the calendar. We had Queen Ramana in Canada arrested about a week ago or so. I think it was around the 7th. I didn't put that on the calendar, but she's apparently going to have her next session on the 17th, which kind of tells me that that's a white hat thing going on in Canada with Queen Ramana, and I believe it's another comm. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are kind of pointing to the 17th being the day that will start the emergency broadcast system. And as I said, it would, if that's the case, it will move to the 26th. There's a few things happening at the end of the month. The 25th would be Christmas, and that might be important in terms of the people who are unawake, the sort of 80 to 90% of the population that is still asleep, because at the end of the emergency broadcast system, they will get their monies. Earlier, we're expecting the RV to give the humanitarian projects the funding they need so they can get started during this period, and that'll be a planning stage. After Christmas, or with Christmas, and this goes into October, we have the Feast of Tabernacles. So that would move into September, actually, if they collapse the calendar on the 4th, which would be interesting. We'll have to see. And the last great day, October 14th, which is interesting on the Gregorian calendar, is the last great day. And that is, it is the final resurrection and God's offer of salvation to all humanity. So it's kind of the final day. Now, if they collapse the calendar, that ends up being on October the 1st, which is the fiscal new year for pretty well the entire world, because we're talking about really 7 kingdoms, but really one world way of thinking about the fifth dimension. We're all ascending and moving to the fifth dimension, and we're creating a new world that will all work together. And all of the currencies with the revaluation are going to be of equal value. All the currencies in the world will be of a similar value. And so when you go to one country, your money there'll be no money changing, or you might be money changing into the new currency, and that might happen for a while. It might end up being a one world currency. We'll have to see. But we're moving to a period in some number of years, and it might be 50 years, where we're going to have no money as people move into the fifth dimension. So it's going to be, there's a lot happening. To anybody that doesn't know this information or has not been following along with the Q movement and the White Hats and the Guardian Alliance, who is really controlling this whole process, God is back on earth. Jesus Christ is back on earth. I should say, rather than God, but in a sense, metaphorically, Jesus Christ is back on earth. And so this is, let's call it a come to Jesus moment. So you need to get one with God, and this is going to be a major transition that we're going to, and we're there. This is the start of it, and it's going to be quite spectacular to see this thing play out. So there's a look at the calendar for September the 11th, today's date, and we have Trump in New York City at a Yankees game, and we'll have to see if the sum of all fears play out. But I've kind of given you an idea of what I'm expecting to happen going forward, and it's going to get really interesting from here on in.